a small group of bishops, headed by Valens of Mursa, met at Sirmium and put out a manifesto which drifted into Anomaeanism without using the term. Hilary calls it the blasphemy. Gwatkin speaks of it as the turning point of the whole contest. The Eusebian coalition fell to pieces the moment that Arianism ventured to have a policy of its own. But for the moment, it was triumphant. Even the aged confessor Hosius signed it. But neither threats nor cajolery could prevail upon him to condemn Athanasius. Within a year, Liberius also, bishop of Rome, exiled to Berea, came to the end of his endurance and signed a compromising formula. Duquesne says, "It meant the abandonment of the position which the Pope had maintained hitherto with most signal distinction, a position for which he had braved the anger of the emperor and the sorrows of exile. It was a weakening, a downfall." The blasphemy was approved at Antioch, but condemned in Gaul, as at Ancyra at a semi-Arian synod under Basil, bishop of Ancyra, to whom the emperor was willing to listen. He persuaded Constantius to withdraw his signature to the blasphemy and to banish the leading Anomaeans. It must be acknowledged that the semi-Arians were persecutors, but the Nicenes were not. The semi-Arians, having thus abused their victory, were outwitted by Valens. They demanded a general council, but Valens persuaded the emperor that it would be less expensive if the western bishops met at Ariminum and the easterns at Seleucia, and he tricked them into agreeing to the preparation of an ambiguous formula which should do no harm to the Anomaeans and yet satisfy the emperor. This was the famous dated creed, drawn up by Mark of Arethusa on Whitsun Eve, May 22, 359. It was on the whole conservative. We say that the Son is like the Father in all things, but left loopholes for the Anomaeans. Basil added a note to his signature that, by like, he meant in all things, not only in will, but in person, and in existence, and in essence. The Nicenes were delighted with this, which they regarded as a surrender at discretion. Valens wanted to admit in all things, but was compelled by Constantius to sign. In the summer of AD 359, some 400 bishops assembled at Ariminum, of whom the majority were firm in defense of the Nicene Creed. They rejected the dated creed, recommended by Valens as simple, scriptural, and approved by the emperor, and they wrote a letter to Constantius insisting on no innovations, which proves that it was Arians, not Catholics, who demanded council after council and creed after creed. The minority accepted the dated creed, and both sides sent deputations to the emperor. Meanwhile, the eastern bishops met at Seleucia. The majority were semi-Arians, but there were a few Nicenes, among whom was Hilary, a host in himself. They held out against the Homoeans until the quaestor, who was in charge for Constantius, dissolved the council. The Orthodox representatives at Ariminum, who had been kept waiting in Adrianople, were commanded to meet Valens at Nice in Thrace, a small town chosen in hope of confusion with Nicaea. Weary of long delay, they were induced to sign a revision of the dated creed, which was now put forth as Nicene. Under extreme pressure, most of them yielded. After all, is it Christianity you want, or only a formula? Which do you worship, Christ or the homoousios? But the Gallican bishops held out until tricked by the suggestion, satisfy the emperor by signing, and add what you like. They drew up a series of anathemas, Valens suggesting anathema to those who say that the Son is a creature like other creatures, which they signed without detecting the quibble. Jerome says, the whole world groaned in astonishment to find itself Arian. The same fate befell the deputation from Seleucia at Constantinople. Constantius drove the Anomaeans into exile, leaving the Homoeans in command of the situation, and the semi-Arians, after a long discussion with him late on the night of December 31st, 359, surrendered. Constantius began the year of his 10th consulate, with his empire at peace. Flushed with success, the Homoeans held a council at Constantinople, at which they deposed the semi-Arians on charges of irregular conduct, despite their signatures, filling their sees with Homoeans and even Anomaeans. The outlook was dark indeed, but it was the darkness before the dawn. A reaction began in the west. Liberius recovered courage and refused to sign. In the east, the Homoean supremacy lasted for 20 years, but great events were impending. In AD 360, Constantius died, having been baptized by Eusebius, one of the original Arian party, now bishop of Antioch. Constantius was in many respects inferior to his father. He was small of stature, ignoble both in presence and character. He was pure in life and a good soldier, and had respect for learning, but his conceit put him at the mercy of flatterers, and his piety did not preserve him from cold-blooded treachery, though he loved the ecclesiastical gain. Julian became emperor. He loathed Christianity, having been brought up at the court of Constantius, who had murdered his nearest relations. We cannot stay to consider Julian's character, nor his tragic failure, but it is for our purpose worthwhile to quote a specimen of the arid Arianism of the teacher to whom his religious education was entrusted, for it explains his bitter contempt for Christianity as he knew it. Aetius, by turns coppersmith, goldsmith, servant, physician, became a Christian sophist, and wrote a treatise containing 47 couplets, of which the following is a specimen. If it is possible for the unbegotten God to make the begotten become unbegotten, both substances being unbegotten, they will not differ from each other as to independence. Why then should we say that the one is changed, and the other changes it, when we will not allow that God produces the Word from nothing? We are not surprised that he left the Galileans to fight out their own quarrels, permitting the exiled bishops to return to their sees, only interfering once to banish Athanasius again, because he had dared in his reign to baptize noble ladies, and as a man loaded with condemnations, he could not return without a special order. He also made a law prohibiting Christians from the study of heathen literature, but he died in AD 363 of a wound received in a skirmish on the Persian frontier, and with him perished his vain dream of reformed heathenism. We must return to Athanasius. When he heard of Basil's manifesto and of the hopeful beginning of the Council of Arminum, he turned to the Semi-Arians as brethren, who differed from him only about the use of a word, who really meant what he meant. As Guatkin says, no sooner is he cheered with the news of hope than the importunate jealousies of 40 years are hushed in a moment, as though the Lord had spoken peace to the tumult of the grey old exile's troubled soul. And the appeal of his treatise on the councils, in which he rises above himself, won a great response from Semi-Arians, who came over to the Nicene side and accepted the homoousios, among them the future leaders in the East. Basil, soon to be bishop of Caesarea in Cappadocia, quoted words of Athanasius to justify his own action. He that is essentially God is coessential with him that is essentially God. If I am to state my own opinion, I accept like in essence, with the addition of exactly, as identical in sense with coessential, but exactly like without essence, I suspect, accordingly, since coessential is the term less open to abuse. On this ground, I too adopt it. Athanasius followed this up at the Council of Alexandria in AD 362 by an attempt to mediate between those who had come to speak of three hypostases in the sense of persons in the Godhead, and those who followed the Nicene Council and still made hypostases equals ousia equals substance, the common deity of all the persons of the Trinity. Both parties were orthodox. It was only necessary to state in which sense they used the term. They also endeavored to restore peace in Antioch by reconciling the stalwart followers of Eustathius under their priest, Paulinus, to the Semi-Arian bishop Meletius. Meletius, immediately after his appointment, had preached an orthodox sermon for which he was promptly deposed, so that there was every reason to accept him in his congregation, which was much the larger on their profession of the Nicene faith. Unfortunately, immediately after the council, the firebrand Lucifer of Cagliari went off to Antioch and took upon himself to consecrate Paulinus as a rival bishop. When Jovian succeeded Julian, he sent cordial letters to Athanasius, inviting him to resume his office and draw up a statement of the faith. Athanasius summoned a synod and framed a synodal letter, with which he at once set off to Antioch, where he was graciously received, while the rival bishop of Alexandria, Lucius, was rebuffed.